Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This one is.
Yeah, and this one's also the scale is the same, and I did a little series, and I really didn't do very many paintings of creatures that were smoking, and or had cigarettes, or maybe they just picked them up. They were just curious. They're just trying it out, trying to look cool or something. I don't know. But in here, there's this snake, and there's this again the struggle, sort of like taken by surprise, and the cigarette's kind of falling out of its mouth. And boy, I tell you,
do you smoke cigarettes yourself?
No, maybe. I don't now.
But you did it one time. I'm just curious, why you thought to use it as
I
a
guess
prop.
I did. I was never really good at it. I always held it wrong, and people made fun of me. Like, I was in some European movie, like kind of holding it. I thought I looked cool, but it didn't last very long. Luckily, I quit pretty quickly. And yeah, I don't know what they're doing with those cigarettes, but they seem important. And
Well,
I
it
did
makes an
about
interesting
5
prop.
paintings with cigarettes, and then I got kind of labeled the cigarette painter. And I was just, he makes the animals that smoke cigarettes, and it's just like, never do that again.
So it was time to move on.
Yeah, my paintings quit smoking.
So here we get to see some of your first still lifes.
Yes.
And again, looking at the Dutch masters.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I really like the idea of the still life iconography and kind of working that and trying to say something new with the same type of imagery and same type of approach, formal approach to creating a work that is a still life. So in this case, and this was also kind of a new direction as well. I got away from the markings on the body that were of distress to markings on the body that were more like almost like a decorative element. They both carried the same information because they're both about rhythm, design, pattern, about place. Because a lot of the earlier paintings really referenced the place that I had lived and the things that I had seen. And they were and one of the photographs that was in the book was of vitiligo. And I mentioned that earlier, and I remember reading up on it from the book. And the doctor who referenced the patient to be photographed referred to it as a beautiful malady. And I know many years later, and I titled one of my pieces "A Beautiful Malady," and it was that specific piece, and that one's not in this show. But I always thought that was such a remarkable thing to say to, for a doctor to look at it as visual information and see an aesthetic in it. Like, not only is it a good example of this disease to use as a teaching model, it's also aesthetically attractive. So that had always kind of lingered in my head. So I started curing everything of the malady and then started making these patterns that were decorative, that also had reference to place and culture.
You just said something that's rather interesting, teaching model. So being a teacher, does that affect your own art practice in any way?
Yeah, absolutely.
How so?
Well, I mean, driving my car influences everything does, but the students in particular.
But the students, yeah.
You know what it is? It's funny because when you're in school and you're going through a critique, you're paying to be there, and you have an instructor who's giving you information because you paid for it. You have a group of students who are also talking about your work. You have one of the best captive audiences money can buy. When you get out of school, it's really hard to get that dialogue. And as a teacher, I listen to it, and I hear my students talk about their work, and I talk about their work, and the dialogue continues, and the evolution of talking about work and understanding, and it's really good to teach freshman and sophomore level students because it's all about the basics, and every day I'm reaffirming the importance of the basics, and that to me is fundamental in my work, is just making sure that I understand the most basic concepts.
How to make a good painting.
Yeah, how to make a good painting. So yeah, and I talk about that constantly. How to make a good photograph. How to reference art, how to talk about art.
Some fanciful creatures have entered your vocabulary at this stage.
Yeah, well, it's again, it's with the patterns and these. two different paintings of octopi.
Octopi.
They were both done in 2001. Yeah, I kind of latched onto this, and again, it references Greek mythology. Specifically, it's the story of Perseus and Medusa. And the story of Perseus doesn't end with just him severing the head of Medusa, Medusa to go rescue, not Persephone, Andromeda. He goes on. He actually, in his journey, he visits Atlas. And Atlas gets sort of warning that Perseus is coming. And Atlas is like, I don't want to deal with this guy. And so he invites Perseus into his home, and with the intention of killing him. And so Perseus becomes wise to it. And so he whips out the head of Medusa and turns Atlas into stone. But when Atlas turns into stone, he actually turns into the earth. So Atlas at this point becomes an immobile figure. So he is now turning into the landscape. He's becoming earth, he's becoming trees, he's becoming rock. And my idea is that if Medusa is still able, if she's still capable of having this power with her gaze to turn Atlas into stone, what happens to Medusa when she looks at Atlas? Is there still information coming in? And so what I was working with is this idea that an octopus is known for its ability to create camouflage. And so these patterns that are on the octopus are both historic and cultural reference.
What are some of the sources for the patterns?
Well, the sources come from historic tapestries and design patterns. So, and most of them, the two that are the examples that are on here are from Northern European references. And to me, it's like, well, what if Medusa happened to be looking at that continent as Atlas was turning into it? How without being literal, what's a cultural reference? Can that become the landscape? Are these patterns now islands? Are they rivers? And the ink that's being squirted out, again, it's a symbol of distress. Is that it's the blood of Medusa coming out, or it's the ink? It's a defense mechanism. And octopi are also referred to as Medusas. So I think that just really ties in.
So did you do any research on octopi while you were working?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sounds like you're really
I mean, I didn't go diving in the ocean. I did the research that you do when you go to google.com and hope for the best.
Yeah, very good.
No, I did. I definitely did my research on that.
Okay. And now one of my favorite parts of your career, because they just look so yummy, are your paintings influenced by the Flemish masters who painted desserts and pastries.
Yeah, and again, and part of working within this history and trying to say something contemporary about it, I think it's maybe the easiest way is to put contemporary confections in there, and in this particular case, this is. My model for this was I drug a table outside on a sunny South Texas day, and I laid out some cloths, and I went to, I can't remember if it was Shipley's or Dunkin' Donuts, but I went out and I bought a bunch of donuts, and I bit into a few of them, and then I started adding these snakes and these other things. So if you look at Dutch still life painting from this era, there was this idea of this abundant still life, this still life that's just pouring over with things, with things that referenced, not only culture but taste, literally taste, and also, I guess metaphorically taste. Like if you had a painting like this, it literally showed you had good taste. And one of the things that was sort of lauded at the time were confection, because I think with all the trading that was happening at the time with the West India Company, I think is what it was called, where sugar cane was starting to be brought in. And then all these great desserts started appearing. And at first it was considered to be seen as a luxury, and then it became a symbol of gluttony. And so in this image, I'm kind of mixing it up a little bit. Sort of on the left side of the frame, or to the viewer's right side of the frame, is sort of the benevolence, the prettiness. And then on the right, you have the bite taken out of the donut, and then you have the snake, and then, the temptation, and then the bug, all sort of drawn in there, kind of, with this split composition that implies two different attitudes about these confections.
And the painting on the left is in the Sama collection. We're so proud to have it on view currently.
Thank
If
you.
you haven't seen it, it's upstairs on the second floor. But it's from a series of cakes, multi-tiered cakes. And I know from what you and I have talked about that the cake itself represents the Tower of Babel, at least in our painting.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, and you don't have to go back to the previous image, but these were all done for a show at Fine Silver, and I generally, when somebody gives me good notice saying like, okay, in a year you're going to have a show, I don't.
You get motivated?
Well, I'm always motivated, David. But when I was doing these shows, well, you know what the motivation is to not make a show of individual paintings, but a show that's a collective and an idea.
A series.
Yeah, and I don't really think of it as an installation, but it is a cycle of paintings.
Well, it's like you have an idea and you want to investigate it very thoroughly.
Right.
So you don't just stop at one.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, I don't want it to be a random splattering, but this idea was based on high art, low art, and some of the references that came from it. So these grander, large paintings of the wedding cakes were sort of like, this is sort of the interpretation, in my view, of when you make a cake. If I'm going to make you a cake, maybe I will one day, and it'll be like a layer cake, Betty Crocker, and get the that's like oh, that's nice, that's a nice dessert. But a wedding cake is just that's an elevated cake.
So did you use actual cakes as your...
Yes.
Yeah. And did you buy them or did you bake them?
No, I took a lot of photos. I'm a terrible baker. You don't want me to make you a cake. But the idea is that that type of confection becomes part of the ceremony. It's an elevated pastry because it really holds a deeper meaning, and it's important. And I'll tell you, I have two major anxieties in life. One of them is being at a wedding and accidentally knocking over the wedding cake. I really fear that. So there's all types of anxiety related to wedding cakes, at least, other than the obvious that I'm not married. But going back to the wedding cake, but yeah, I see them as the ziggurat form.
Right.
It's the Tower of Babel, and the idea is that the king who ordered. And this is from the book of Genesis. The king that ordered the Tower of Babel to be built was King Nimrod. And the idea was he was trying to elevate himself. And the punishment for doing it was destroying the tower, and then everybody who descended from the tower spoke a different language. And so the symbols that are in here that I borrowed from that, like the toads are those symbols that are of the earth. They're of the ground. They don't ascend. Butterflies are seen as symbols. In the Greek, the ancient Greek word for butterflies is psyche. And in Sama, there is a sculpture of a Cupid figure that has butterfly wings. Am I correct about that? Or I think, yeah, thanks. But I think that, in this case, that, the idea of psyche as a soul that can travel in and out of body, whether the body is alive or not, is a figure that's supposed to be elevated to the heavens. So it's sort of like a placement of where things exist. And one of the butterflies is perched on one of the frog's heads in that one. And then in the one on the
right.
I'm dyslexic, so.
It's the viewer's right. That's fine.
That one.
Yeah.
That one also has the same references, but in here, you have these birds that are unable to fly, and then in the background you have a snake that's strangling a rat. Again, sort of the realities of the earth, and then again these butterflies sort of floating above it. Now these smaller,
Hostess.
Exactly, and these smaller paintings were presented opposite those other ones. They're treated with the same iconography as the other still life paintings, the ones with the elevation, with the butterflies and the dragonflies in this case. But this is sort of that reference to low art, where instead of the wedding cake, you have confections that you buy at a gas station. There's a moon pie, there's some ding dongs. And put on a plate. It's like, here you go, kids. Where again, it sort of comes from that idea of high art, low art. I borrowed iconography from that.
Mm-hmm.
And now these, I think these were in the same show, and the one over there was not in that show. This one above my head was in the show, and this one I have to thank Dwight Hobart from Liberty Bar for graciously loaning me some of those beautiful carpets that he has. Rugs that he has.
He loaned those to Sama also last year for our Dad Hannah project.
He has some amazing stuff.
If you haven't eaten at Liberty Bar, pay attention next time to those
really,
incredible rugs.
And he just recently let me go over there and photograph some more because I'm going to do another series with some tables. But again, just with the iconography and borrowing that and borrowing the decorative element, and then in this. And in this one over here, there's the pomegranates and the butterfly and symbol. The pomegranate is a symbol of Persephone.
Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Persephone was when Hades kind of stole her away. I think it was Orpheus. Is that correct? Orpheus was the one who was supposed to. No, I'm sorry. I'm getting Eurydice and Orpheus mixed up. Persephone was someone who was dragged down to hell, and then. Sort of her lasting symbol was created into a pomegranate.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's blowfish.
And this is fairly recent? Let's see.
What year is that?
2003. Okay, no, it's not that recent. Okay.
No, 10 years ago. Yeah, I've done. I like blowfish.
But you've returned to them recently. But let's talk about this one.
I still think of the blowfish kind of like a figure of Atlas. Again, it's a globe and it has this pattern on it that's like a landscape, and so. This one's a little bit more, they become these ornaments, and there are also these things like the octopus that they change form to protect themselves. The octopus shoots out ink; it can camouflage itself. But if you've ever seen a deflated blowfish, there's nothing sadder than the ocean. It's just this, whoa. But when they blow up and they become these pretty spectacular things with spikes and other things that make them look more threatening. So in here, again, it's sort of just a reference to the landscape, to the idea that they are like a figure, like an atlas, like a little globe, like the ocean is a universe where these things are suspended in water, where things move around in that. Oh, there's another smoking thing.
Right.
Now
the chain smoker.
Chain smoker, complete chain smoker. Yeah, this is a gharial type of alligator that has those long noses. And they even have those in Texas. But this is just, if you're going to smoke, you got to do it right. And this is really like, all about that. Just, indulgence. It's working with symbols of gluttony.
And where'd you get the image for the alligator?
That came from, I think Jim Harder. Mm-hmm. Jim Harder has a collection of these beautiful old illustrations from the 18th, 19th century.
That's right.
And he releases these as books for artists to use.
That's right.
And they're copyright-free images. So actually, I think I took about 3 of those images and kind of cut them around and pasted them and came up with this thing. But it was a great reference. I just really liked the pose. I liked the way that it was standing and kind of turning and looking over its shoulder.
Mm-hmm. And Jim Harder, by the way, was one of the artists of Samoma, the San Antonio Museum of Modern Art, which was the artist-run space, one of the first ones in our city in the 70s, and we recently documented that project.
I've talked to, I've only introduced myself to Jim, but I really wish I had the opportunity to tell him how wonderful those books that
we can make that happen. For you.
I would love to make that happen. I owe him a lot.
I'll put you in touch with him.
Oh, he was great. If you've and I found his book of all places at Borders.
He has actually quite a number of illustrated books. They're quite fabulous.
Yeah. They're pretty amazing.
Now, this is in the collection of Guillermo Nicolas.
Yes.
Yes, a fabulous painting. Tell us about it.
Now, this painting and the previous painting were done for a show that Michael Maloney very, very generously sponsored, where he sent Vincent Valdez, Joey Farso... To Paris, yeah, and James Smolik and myself to Paris to do a show at Parsons, at the school there. And it's funny because as I did these paintings, this was... I was working from ideas that were sort of a accumulation of ideas. I was sort of in a transition phase, not sure what was coming next, and so I found myself kind of trying to still, trying to find images that I'd worked with before and still try to create new information about them. I didn't feel like I had exhausted them that I still felt that I still had something to say about them. And again, like the crocodile or the gharial, I felt that there was something that was still about this ingestion. These globes, these figures, the symbols of butterflies and smoking, and this pig balancing on the ball like it's in a circus act, that it's a performer. And I think that that's where this imagery was coming from at the time. Now, at this time also, I had moved into an old storefront, so I had a much bigger studio space. So I was so these paintings are, I wouldn't say they're huge. They're probably about I think this one's about 5 feet tall by about 4.5 feet wide.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is an oddity in your work. We see an actual human being.
Well, it's yeah. I kind of at this stage, after I'd done the show in Paris, I really, like I said, I was kind of going through a transition. I really wanted to get back to the figure, and it's something I still want to do, and I still sort of really like working with the human figure. But
do you work with live models?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I need to concentrate on a little bit more. In this particular case, again, I was working with mythology, and one of the reoccurring themes in my paintings around this time, probably for the last 10 years, have been this, I wouldn't call it mythology, but it's a sort of fascination with the sea and the creatures that are created from it, whether they were real or imagined or folklore. And so, certainly mermaids comes into that. And I was, I think there's also references to Hawaii. They're playing ukuleles and they're twins, and certainly going to the story of the
what's
sirens.
The significance of the twins?
Well, I think it just comes into the story of the sirens.
Okay.
And sort of tempting. Odysseus, thank you. And he was the one. He's the one that had himself lashed to the mast, right? So he could hear him sing, I believe. And so, but they're the ones that made the ships crash. So I thought that this was a way of kind of working with that image and being able to work with the figure.
Okay. And the giraffe.
Yeah, and this is just, I think I was just sort of stretching the parameters of what object on a table could be. It's like, here's a well-made table, and it's like, a giraffe? Why not? And it's presented as if it's, an object to be admired. Not like in a zoo where it's behind a cage, but this is sort of like so formalized, so ridiculously formalized that
it's as if it's posing for you.
Yeah. And it's great. I had a blast doing this painting. I did a few of these giraffes on the table because once I started on them, I couldn't stop. I was just like, God, I love this. So it was just one of those things that I just think is just so absurd. I really enjoy doing this imagery, and especially in that style using tenebrism, where it's that extreme contrast. And again, kind of playing off the idea of twins again. This was. Work. And now, in a few slides later, we're gonna see some dog imagery, and this was sort of. And I've used that all along.
Do you have a dog?
I do. I've had several dogs. This was one of my dogs.
One of your dogs?
Yeah.
You like William Wegman's work?
Yeah. I think No, I do. I really do.
Well, I do too. But
yeah,
anyway,
I do,
yeah.
and I like the image of the dog, and I like the different iconography culturally that the dog can symbolize, because we see it as a symbol of faith, and in some culture it's seen as a symbol of filth. And it's and for me, there's this dog is kind of a combination of a study, but also I don't know, for some reason at this time I liked the idea of working with the type of symmetry in my compositions, and I was repeating figures. It's the same model, but just not quite a mirror image, but
right.
Repeating that element. And this is a drawing, and this is a very large drawing. I think the width of it was about maybe, I want to say 9 feet, and I think the height was about 4 feet. However big I could get a roll of paper, that was the height. And I think 4.5 feet was about the biggest I could get over at Hurwick's. So I just rolled it out on my wall. It was a big roll
Now,
of paper.
was this a commission, if I remember correctly?
This was a commission. This is at the Pearl Stable.
Right.
And I was approached to do this, and through Fine Silver, and this is also a very large painting. This one was a whole summer of work, and my first experience in doing a public art piece. Or I don't really know if it's public art, but it's in a public setting. And I think the width of this one is, if it's not 12 feet, it's 10 feet, something like that. It's pretty big. And they wanted to make something that was fitting of the environment, which was the old stable house where they kept the horses that would, drag the beer out. And they used the Clydesdale. Those were the horses. So